You have a book, He Calls Me Redeemed. Now, you decided to really come forward with your story, reveal a lot of very difficult details of your past. A lot of people are not willing to do this sort of thing because it opens you up to having to share things that are difficult. Why did you decide to do this?
Well, hey, Billy, thank you so much for having me on. I guess, listen, I know what it is to be desperate. I know what it is to feel trapped, to feel hopeless, lost, broken. And I also know what it feels to be redeemed by Jesus Christ. And I know what it is to feel freedom on the other side of pain. So I knew that my story had the ability, the potential to change so many people's lives. And I wanted to be able to write a story that would give hope to the hopeless.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. There are so many people today who are struggling. I mean, we're going to get into all the different issues in your story, but you talk about addiction, right? That's something that you went through, and all sorts of other issues. But addiction, we have suicide. Suicidal ideation in this culture right now is through the roof, and people are desperate. So to have a story where somebody has come out on the other side, has found faith, and has triumphed over all of these things, these are important stories for us to be hearing. So let's dive in, and obviously we want to point people to the book, but we want to talk about some of the things that you went through. This is a loaded question, but how did you end up falling into drugs and addiction?
Sure. So, well, sexual abuse started for me at a young age. I was about 10 years old. And that really sent me off into a trajectory of, drug use. And from high school years going into my 20s, it just, became more progressive and more, it went from marijuana to narcotics, and then when I got into drug dealing, that led to a whole nother level of that lifestyle. And ultimately found myself addicted to heroin just in the midst of all those progressions.
Wow. So, I mean, heroin is sort of the ultimate when it comes to addiction. It's the thing that seems to be claiming the most lives right now. It's the thing that it seems almost impossible for people to get off of it. You described a number of drugs, marijuana, sort of moving down the line. Do you view, I'm just curious, as we're talking about this, marijuana as a gateway? It sounds like you sort of went from one thing to another. What drove that, sort of the different search for different highs?
Oh, sure. 1,000% that was my experience. Actually, the person responsible for the abuse introduced me to marijuana at a young age. And then, that definitely opened me up into, again, high school years, alcohol and marijuana, and then, cocaine and ecstasy and PCP and all these different things. It just progressed over time, leading up to the ultimate, as you say, which was, well, now it's fentanyl. That's the issue. Now you can't even find heroin anymore because it's all been replaced with fentanyl, which is claiming the lives of 100,000 plus lives every year. And it's an enormous, enormous problem in our country, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's one thing to talk about being on those drugs, and we're going to get into how you got off of it and how you found God. But describe what your life was like while you were in this addiction. What were you like? What was your mindset like? How were you living?
Oh my gosh, Billy, it was an absolute disaster. When I tell you, I mean, I robbed everybody I know. Some people I didn't know, and had problems with law enforcement, problems in the street. Just miserable. You would have crossed the street if you saw me walking.
Wow.
Just desperation, hopelessness, absolute misery in every capacity you could think of. I mean, it was just a horrific, horrific time in my life.
Okay, so you're in that horrific time in your life, and you came to a moment of absolute desperation. Talk about that. Talk about being at the end of yourself, because many times when it comes to a story like yours, you have to hit rock bottom, right? I mean, that's really either people die or they hit rock bottom. Unfortunately, death for some people is the rock bottom, and there's no coming back from that on this side of eternity. But
Yeah.
where were you? How bad did it get?
Oh gosh. So, well, I'm at this point in my life, I'm about 27, 28 years old. I am I'm suicidal because I'm so miserable from the addiction. And every morning I wake up, as soon as I open my eyes, it was just absolute misery from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep. Dope sickness is just a horrific thing to go through. Again, finding different ways to try to get high and get feel okay. So I found myself in a place where I shot my last few bags of heroin. I'm in Long Branch, New Jersey, and I decide that's it. I'm just going to jump in front of the train. I can't do this anymore. So I head to the train station. Anybody who knows Long Branch knows you have to pass Monmouth Medical from where I was to get to the train station. I just felt this something urging me into that hospital. So I went in. I told them what was going on. I had been there before. They put me in the psychiatric ward there. I was there for 2, 3 nights. Middle of the night, one night, my mother asked me, "Do you need anything?" I told her, "Mom, there's a Bible on my nightstand." I had gone to Keswick Colony of Mercy in Whiting, New Jersey, about 6 months prior, and I got asked to leave for a few different. I was using drugs in the rehab, so I was asked to leave. So I'm in this psychiatric ward, 2, 3 in the morning. I have this Bible that I asked my mother to bring. I opened the Bible to a random page. It was Psalm 88. Billy, I read that psalm, and it was like if I could have written God a letter in that moment. It was everything that I felt, everything that I thought.
Wow.
I just broke in half, face to the floor, tears on the ground. I just begged Jesus to save me. I went to sleep that night. I woke up the next morning. I didn't have insurance, so they asked me, they have to discharge you. I said, "Can I please stay? I don't want to go back out on the street." They said, "Try to use our phone, get in somewhere." I used the phone. I called a bunch of places, no available beds, no available beds, no available beds. I'm getting ready to leave. I get all my stuff. I'm heading for the door. I tell them, "Buzz me out of here." The woman goes to hit the buzzer to let me out on the street. In mid hand motion, the phone rings. She said, "It's for you." I get on the phone. It was the director of admittance from Keswick Colony of Mercy. He asked me how I'm doing. I told him what was going on. He said, "Armand, a strange thing happened to me last night." I said, "What happened?" He said, "God woke me up and told me he wants you to come back to this place." So at the same time, I was crying out to the Lord in the middle of the night. He was waking this man up, Jim Freed, in another part of the state. And that was my opportunity. I knew it. I went for it. And the rest is history. There was no looking back. The Lord just
And
completely
that's
delivered
pretty
me.
wild because you were booted out of that, rehab because you were using. So it's not
Yeah.
common probably that they're calling people back
No.
necessarily. I don't know. And
Nope.
saying, and to have God prompt that at the very moment that you were crying out as you were going to push that button to go out.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you asked your mom for the Bible. Before going to that rehab, had God been a part of your life in any way? Were you brought up with faith? I'm curious because all this chaos
Sure.
is going on, but something made you want that Bible.
Sure. Well, I think an interesting part of the story, my mother's Italian, my father's Armenian. And an interesting part of the story is that the book takes place in Asbury Park, which is a huge go to place for Armenians back in the day. And there's my culture is weaved throughout the book, but part of that is Armenian Orthodox Christianity. And I mean, I never had a problem that God existed. That was never an issue, but he just felt so distant. It would be like having a father in another state that you never met before. You know he exists. You've heard stories about him, but you don't know him personally. And then all of a sudden, for him to show up one day and say, "Hey, I'm going to spend time with you over the next few months, years, and we're just going to get to know each other." That's a completely different situation, and that's what God did with me. I didn't meet. But even though I had a foundation, I would say, just knowing that God existed, going to church. I went to Catholic school. But this was different. This was a relationship, not a religion.
Yeah. Well, and so you go to that rehab, and the
Mm.
book is going to tell this story. I don't want to give it all away, but
Mhm.
your life changes. And so here you are today. You've written this book, you have this story. Talk a little bit about how your life is different today from where you were in those moments of desperation.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I have no high school diploma. I had no prospects, no job, nowhere to live. I'm starting over again. And I basically wrote a list of things that I wanted to accomplish. And I asked the Lord to help me accomplish them. It was things like simple, just get a job, get my high school diploma. I actually wrote meet a wife and have children. I put that all in the same line. And then at the very end of this list, I wrote, write a book about how Jesus Christ saved my life. And that seemed really ridiculous at the time because, again, I was just in a horrible situation. But one after the other, the Lord just was faithful and checked those boxes. And I was able to do all those things. My life has been a absolute blessing for the last 15 years. I mean, my wife and I I met my wife, Nicole. So grateful for her, for my kids, Arman, Nikos, and Theo. They're 8, 6, and 13 months. And, we've done so many incredible things. We've traveled, um, spent time together as a family. It's been an unbelievable experience over these last 15 years since I gave my heart to the Lord.
And when you look at God now versus when you did back then, you never had a problem with him existing,
Mhm.
but that personal connection, how has that changed for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, he's the foundation. He's a solid foundation to build your life on. There's a difference between being clean and sober and not using drugs versus being delivered. And that goes for anything, whether we're talking about drugs, we're talking about alcohol, pornography, all these things that are causing so much chaos in our culture, in our world. Um, there's a difference when you're talking about deliverance. I don't wake up every morning and have to fight not going to use drugs. It's a complete shift and change in mindset. It's a new life. You're a new creation. There's a verse, 2 Corinthians 5:17, that says, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. So that's what I've experienced, is that it's just a complete newness of life in every aspect.
Yeah, and that newness of life is inspiring to people who are where you once were right now, who are hearing this or watching this. And I think the family members, I think back to your mom, the people around you, you said you robbed almost everybody you knew.
Sure.
How have the people around you reacted to this life change?
Yeah, I think it was a shock I mean, people who haven't seen me in a long time. Like, I've seen people who I haven't seen in, 15 years or whatever. And I see them at the store. They look like they saw a ghost because, first of all, I don't think anybody would have guessed that I would have lived to be 40. I'm 41 now. I don't think anybody would have guessed that I would have made it. I most certainly should have died many times. And anybody who picks up the books and reads it will quickly see that, man, this guy, the Lord definitely had his hand on me throughout, even before I was a believer. Just all of the things that took place in my life, I can look back now, Monday morning quarterback it, and look in retrospect and say, God was he was right with me the entire time, all through those moments, through those years.
Yeah, and that's the thing, knowing that God is there for you and always was, even when you didn't feel that necessarily. Now you know that that is the case. When it comes to He Calls Me Redeemed, the book, what is your hope for the takeaway that people will pick this book up when they're done reading it, put it down? What do you want them thinking and feeling?
It's funny, Billy. Actually, the script. Well, so a friend of mine reached out to me after I'd written the book. It was about to be published, and the whole goal was, I started the book with a prayer, and I just said, Lord, I want you to use my testimony to lead as many people to you as possible. Just use it, Lord, and help me to write it. So I wrote the book. It's going to be published soon. I had a good friend from high school reach out to me, and I would mention his name, but I'm not going to, just in case he doesn't want me to. But he said, hey man, you wrote a book? I said, yeah. He said, can I read it? I said, it's not available yet, but as soon as it is, I'll give you a copy. So he texts me back the next day. He says, I can't wait. Just send me a PDF or something. I got to read this thing. So he reads the book. He says, can we meet? We meet at a Starbucks near me. We're hanging out. And he says, hey man, well, after I read the book, it made me completely question my relationship with God, my relationship with Jesus, my family, my kids. We had that conversation. The Lord did an amazing thing in his life. He's now coming to our church with his wife, his kids, for the past year or so. I mean, I couldn't. He's a really good friend of mine, so I'm so grateful just on that. But that's what my hope is for the book, is that people would stop and ask themselves the hard questions after reading this book. It covers so many things: life and death, and purpose, and reason for living, and all these different things. That I really just hope people stop and think and ask themselves the question: Who is Jesus?
I love that. Who is Jesus? That is the most important question that we can ask. And the book is He Calls Me Redeemed. Now, as people sort of follow your journey, when this does come out, where's the best place for people to go right now so they can kind of keep up with you to find out when they can grab copies of it?
Absolutely. So, well, the book is available anywhere online that books are sold. So you can go pretty much anywhere, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you shop for books, you're going to be able to find the book. I have a website, www.armankaymakcian.com. I know that's a tough name, but it's basically www, my full name, .com. And then, also my Instagram, if people could check out my Instagram, all the info's on there. Or you could just go into Amazon or wherever and type in "He Calls Me Redeemed," and it's going to come up.
Well, I so appreciate you taking the time joining me today. It's an incredible story of what God has done in your life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Billy. It's been my pleasure.